to Reclamation Time, live on Tuesday the 13th of February. We're live on X Spaces today, and a recording will be available tomorrow as a podcast on Apple, Alexa, Spreaker and Spotify. You can listen and text on X from any device. I just want to say thanks to this month's advertisers, the Bath Decorative Antiques Fair, limbering up for the planting season with fresh stocks of reclaimed, salvaged and antique garden items from the likes of Acanthus, Linda North, Elam Antiques, No. 1 Lewis, and old school Salvo member Simon Wharton, who deals, restores and fits enormous ancient stone fireplaces. The trade preview is on Thursday the 14th, and the public are welcome on Friday and Saturday the 15th and 16th of March. Full details at bathdecorativeantiquesfair.co.uk. So the topic is United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and they're not terribly enthusiastic about reuse, I think I could say.
Yeah.
And I'll explain more about that in a moment. I've taken some notes from the United Nations website. Starting off with, why do the Sustainable Development Goals matter? As far as I'm concerned, and I expect you feel the same way, Brian, but the SDGs, as they're known in the trade, are seriously informing policy around the world.
Yes.
Every country, or 200 countries around the world, are using them as a marker for how to form policy about sustainability in their countries, in their own countries. So governments are doing it, local authorities are doing it, regional authorities, and big companies are doing it. All architectural practices are doing it. Everybody in construction, it seems as if SDGs are pretty endemic. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I do. The RIBA have been attaching themselves to the SDGs, so they align specific parts of the RIBA, the architect's process, to and mapped out. I think it's stages 0 to 8 or 0 to 7, and map them out against the SDGs. So the profession understands the topic and understands how they all fit together. So I would imagine the other professions have done it too, QSs in particular.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read this out off their website. The environment underlies each of the goals. There are 17 of them, from eliminating hunger to reducing inequalities to building sustainable communities around the world. The UN supports the achievement of 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. We promote environmental this is the UN speaking, we promote environmental sustainability as a crucial enabling factor in implementing the SDGs and ensuring the health of our planet. We build countries' capacities to track their progress towards these goals, which is an important point. I'll come back to that later. And we aim to ensure that the environment is integrated into all aspects of sustainable development. 4 core principles underpin the United Nations approach to the 2030 agenda. The UN's aim is to reach various targets by 2030 in each of the 17 sustainable development goals.
Yeah.
So the 4 core principles are universality, global in nature and universally applicable; integration. The 2030 agenda moves beyond acting as if sustainable development is about 3 disconnected pillars, which is environment, social and economic dimensions.
Yeah.
The fourth one is the third one. Is human rights and equity. Inequalities are not just determined by economics. To achieve basic levels of goods and services for all, better redistribution of wealth and resources, both within and between countries, is needed, and including other things like rule of law and so on. Innovation is the fourth point. Innovative pathways are needed to allow countries to leap forward. And that that's another important point, which I'll come back to. But so those are the 4 points. And then I won't run through all the 17 sustainable development goals, but I'll just mention goal number 8, which is to improve global resource efficiency in consumption and production and endeavour to decouple economic growth from environmental degradation in accordance to the 10-year framework of programmes on sustainable consumption and production. So that's goal number 8. Goal number 11, to support least developed countries, including through financial and technical assistance in building sustainable and resilient buildings using local materials, for which there's no, it has actually after this, it's the only goal which has no indicator to say when it's reached its target, that particular.
Yeah.
And goal number 12, which is the important one for us, 12.2 is by 2030 to achieve sustainable management and efficient use of natural resources, and the indicators to see whether you're achieving that target is to measure the material footprint per capita, and the material footprint per GDP, domestic material consumption and domestic material consumption per capita, and so on. So that's 12.2. 12.5, which is the crucial one, as far as I'm concerned anyway, as far as we're concerned, by 2030, substantially reduce waste generation through prevention, reduction, recycling and reuse. And you'll note there that reuse comes last.
Yeah.
And the indicator for this is measuring the national recycling rate and tons of material recycled. Nothing reuse and tons of material reused at all. So 2 years ago at Glasgow, we asked to go and present to the United Nations at the COP20, the last one that was held in Britain.
Yeah.
But that was turned down. There were 50 other people who wanted to try and present, and it was a bit of a lottery, and we didn't win.
Right.
So now we're trying to go back to the UN to discuss this particular target, 12.5, because what's happened is that this phrase, substantially reduce waste generation through prevention, reduction, recycling and reuse, the recycling and reuse part of that phrase has been taken and applied pretty well universally in certainly in the UK, in Europe and in USA, and a vast array of other countries. Until we've argued very strongly for a long time now that recycling and reuse as a phrase they should decouple the two words, and recycling should very much be less of a priority than reuse. Reuse, we're still, as far as we're concerned here, we're still seeing figures of around between 1% and 2%, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Construction materials being reclaimed and reused. And that figure was probably better in the 1990s when we first started measuring it. It hasn't shifted. In some areas, it shifts temporarily above that. But overall, if you look at all material together, it hasn't shifted. And so we're not doing very well, despite the millions, billions of pounds, dollars, euros, and everything else being thrown at this, and all the froth which has been developed in, say, the last 2 or 3 years about circular economy. It's not shifting the dial at all in terms of the amount of reuse. And worse than that, the organisations and businesses that have been around since the 1990s or earlier, 1980s, even 1970s in some instances, have been ignored by the sort of nouveau circular economy recyclers. And it's, instead of circular economy thinking being reuse economy thinking, the recycling thinking, and the circular part of it seems to be more a circular argument that keeps on going on, that we should be recycling more rather than reusing more. Ellen MacArthur and the MacArthur Foundation,
right?
Because they were set up by her after she'd sailed around the world, because she was disgusted by the amount of plastic in the ocean.
Yeah,
which is fair enough.
Yeah,
but her motivation, and the only way you can really deal with plastic is to recycle it, especially if it's been in the ocean.
Yeah.
You can't reuse it, and so in the event, even if you could reuse it, it'll degrade into microplastics and end up in the sea. So So I think that's what drove this sort of, and it continues to drive recycling above reuse, is simply that recycling, which is destroying reusable material, is more popular. It's easier to do. It's easier to control by the multinationals and the big business, and reuse is basically usually small businesses, a lot of small, either commercial or social enterprise type businesses.
Yeah.
Who, when you add them all up, are doing quite a lot. If you look at the total of approximate total of stock holdings of reclaimed building material in the UK, for example, it's about 150,000 tonnes at any one time. So a huge amount that's available to buy.
Yeah.
It's not a good situation.
No, bloody Nora. The thing. Just looking at the wording on the UN stuff, recycling and reuse are both there, so they understand there is a significant difference between the two, but they haven't sort of really understood the importance at all of the reuse over recycling. And I always, whenever I see recycling, and I talk to people about recycling or the whole resource efficiency thing, recycling is the first word that people think of. And I have to remind people that, in the office, when you've got recycling bins, it's got nothing to do with recycling. It's about segregation. And unless you are buying recycled, you are not recycling. So you're not part of the solution. You're just part of the problem, that you have a waste and you just segregate it off and hope somebody else is dealing with it. So the fact that they've got reuse and recycling in this 12.5 means they do understand there's a significant difference between them, but they haven't really understood the importance of reuse. So I thought that we needed to kind of convince them that recycling is the wrong word, but it's actually it's the whole business about prioritising one over the other that needs to be hammered home. And I agree. There's a kind of new group of young architects who are kind of engaging with the circular economy, but not necessarily wanting to kind of go and look at the existing reclamation yards. My suspicion is that because there's a lot of artisan material in the architectural salvage world, they don't see it as a material resource that they can turn to, because they just want simple rectangular things without any of the embellishments. So if they've seen a salvage yard, then they'll think, oh, well, that's not really where I'm going to find what I'm looking for. So there's probably a re-education thing that needs to be done, because that's where you get your cubic meters of reclaimed bricks, which are fundamental to the kind of reclaim reuse story. When bioregionals started up, probably 1 or 2 decades ago, and they did their bioregional reclaim, they were prioritising kind of unembellished materials, things like concrete curbstones and pieces of timber, softwood or hardwood, and not much else. So their priority was different, if you like, from the architectural salvage sector. And so there's always that barrier. I suppose there's a need to kind of make sure that the architectural profession is aware of the range of materials that are available. And, your website does it very well in that you can go onto the site and you can see tons of hardwood that have been extracted from one place or another. But is there something else that needs to be done? Is there probably another kind of marketing activity?
Yeah, I think you're right. The education is a key, because if these architects had their heads into the circular economy, when in the 1970s I designed and built with reclaimed material, and what you do is you go and look to see what's available, and then you design your buildings around what's available. It's so simple. Yeah. Whereas what architects are trained to do is look in a load of books for glossy books full of materials, and they pick this and they pick that, so they don't understand the concept of building with what's available, as opposed to coming up with these. It's rather like the difference between organic gardening and cooking a stew made from your own vegetables on the morning of that you want to eat it, and buying a load of stuff on Ocado or some other buying platform where you can get, by and large, anything that you want and cook it up like that. So one is a sort of a lazy way of doing it, and one is the hard way of doing it. And architects, I've got a certain amount of sympathy, even though in education it is an educational problem. Architects are beset these days with more and more complexities in trying to get a simple building built. Yes. And in the old days, it was when I was involved in designing and building, it was really simple. You could do the whole thing yourself, even structural engineering, the simple just beam calculations and things like that. Yes. Yeah. All very easy compared to now. And you do wonder, have they made everything more complex in order to make it for career reasons? So you have to follow the regulations, you have to employ different specialists, and you can't just get on and do things in your own way, in your own time, and use that as a...
Yeah, I think that's probably driven by professional indemnity insurance as much as anything else, because they're always steering you away from stuff you don't know, and encouraging you to just do business as usual. There was a group of architects who were not permitted to join one of the main alternative professional indemnity insurance parties, which was set up by architects fed up with the premiums. So they actually started to say, okay, we're bog standard safe architects, and we'll do bog standard safe architecture, and we won't include the high flyers who are kind of doing radical weird stuff, so that our premiums can be sort of okay, and not the kind of the mess that they kind of got into in the last since Grenfell, I suppose. So there was a kind of drive to kind of be safe and be consistent and stick to what you know. And so it's just business as usual, conventional construction, bricks and mortar, concrete, steel, and to get outside of that, you have to have specialists. So one of the engineers that was dealing with bioregional and BedZ and Z Factory was an engineer who was prepared to look at reclaimed materials and effectively certify it for use in a reuse situation. So there were few and far between the engineers who were prepared to do that, and so in a way there's just another little barrier to breaking out from business as usual. And I suspect that's got something to do with it. But I'm absolutely convinced that architectural education doesn't engage with resource efficiency, with sustainability in an adequate way.
We get so we do get quite a good caucus of people that contact us as students,
right.
And they are keen on reuse.
Okay.
What we find is, they'll even do theses on reuse of reclaim. But what we find is, as soon as they get into the real world and have to go and work for an architect's practice, they end up not reusing anything. And so one assumes that it isn't just the education. I'm sure you're right. It is education would help, but that one of the things that I don't like is when people say think outside the box. And to me, we should be thinking inside the box of what's available in reclaimed material, rather than coming up with novel ways of spending more money. And a lot of the most resource extensive buildings are stainless steel and glass, and these things which are hugely carbon intensive.
Yes.
A lot of the materials in salvage yards are quite basic, timber and stone and things which don't embody a lot of energy. So it's kind of, as far as I'm concerned anyway, it is an educational thing, but that education goes right the way up through all of the institutions, up through governments, up through to the United Nations. And you do think, when you see a thing saying the indicator should be the national recycling rate as opposed to reuse. You do think, well, you do wonder. I do wonder anyway. Is there an agenda? Is it the World Economic Forum, multinational globalization, saying we don't want to see reuse. We just like to munge it all and by recycling it, because that way we're not diminishing the availability of the market for our new material, which we would be by letting reuse in to the marketplace. And I remember I had a meeting in 1997, 6, something like that, a long time ago, with the head of the construction directorate at the European Union. I actually got into his office and had a sit-down chat with him.
Yeah.
And he was a German, and at that time Germany had no salvage yards, and thought that nobody would. Why would anybody, even Friends of the Earth in Germany, who tried to set up a salvage yard outside Berlin and reclaimed a few bricks, and nobody wanted to buy them. Why would we want to buy second-hand bricks? We've got plenty of new bricks, so and they didn't see energy as important. But he said to me, and if I quote it, he said, "I will not let reclaimed building material into the market in the EU through the back door," is how he put it.
What?
That's what he called it, through the back door. Now, what happened subsequently was that there were salvage yards in France and Belgium and Holland and the UK.
Yeah.
And Ireland. In that quarter of that sort of sector of Europe, there weren't many in the Mediterranean countries or the Nordic countries, or the Eastern European countries. It was, broadly speaking, in those in that sort of northwest Europe.
Yeah.
And what happened was that to a man or woman, the governments of those countries derogated from that part of the Construction Products Directive, as it was then, which required, once a European standard had been agreed on a construction material, all non-conforming materials to be taken off the market. That was the rule. That was the law.
Yeah.
And, I can remember writing to Prescott, John Prescott, who was the ODPM, Office of the Deputy Prime Minister, with Tony Blair, and said, have you derogated, and I did this quite regularly and didn't get a reply normally. I wrote to him and said, have you derogated from the Construction Products Directive with respect to reclaimed building material? And his office phoned me. He didn't phone me, his office did, and said, we have derogated. And I said, great, can I have that in writing? And he said no. He said he wouldn't give it to me in writing. So the salvage trade, such as it is in the UK, has continued to plough its furrow without any protection in law at all. And similarly in Europe, same thing. They've derogated there too. And they're now coming round to the idea that they've got to do something about that. And we've had a discussion with a newly formed body since Grenfell, called the Office of Product Safety and Standards, and they intend to regulate all construction materials over and above the building regulations or anything else. And at the moment, they're looking at things like fire, obviously. Yeah. But they want to regulate the salvage sector. That's and we asked to get involved with this, and but we got short shrift, and we yet have not really connected with the government, either the government at the top level with people like Michael Gove, or with the institutions which have been set up, all of whom have got a huge career agenda going on. Yeah. There's like a land grab of regulations going on at the moment, coming from all quarters, and reclamation and reuse doesn't feature in that. So it's all a bit tricky. I think at some point there'll be some kind of sort out, hopefully, and somebody will start listening. That makes sense. Yeah. One of the things, I had a meeting at the Department of Biz a few years ago, and about 3 years ago, all about reclaimed building material. And hang on a sec. I've just got to see if I can get this guy, invite him to speak. Well, if you're there, I'm making you a speaker so you can join this in this conversation. Okay. So, I'm not sure if he can. Maybe he can't. I've got this guy from Nairobi, an architect in Nairobi, who is interested in this problem. Yeah. But actually, just going away from moaning about how awful things are, one of the things which the Sustainable Development Goals are trying to do is knowledge transfer. And they want to transfer knowledge from the rich, powerful and regulated and sensible West to the poorer regions of the world, including Africa. Mm. And I've sent you a photograph. Did you see that photograph of those doors?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Well, I sent you a photograph of the doors. They are in a salvage yard in Nairobi.
Oh, right.
And for years now, I've been trying to persuade the UK and other countries, US and Europe, to, when they remove doors from a building, to shut the door, lock it, with all
the ironmongery intact.
Exactly. Lock it, and then put buttons across the architrave so you're holding it as a sort of in place. And then use a skill saw to saw around the outside of the architrave through the fixings and the masonry, so that you end up with a complete door set, which you can whack into any building really easily, rather than doing what most people do, which is they open the door, unscrew the hinges, take the handles off, and then I don't know what they do with the architrave and the liner and everything, but probably throw it away. And you just end up with doors, and usually doors that are the wrong size because the opening hasn't been made for it. So But the fascinating thing there is that in the Nairobi Salvage Yard, they've actually done that. You've got that picture is.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, all the fastenings are there, aren't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Otieno, who.
Whenever I go to the big shows now, whenever there's somebody there who's promoting fire doors, I always ask the question, when BWF Certifier set up a scheme for making fire doors, either as a full door set or as 7 different tradesmen coming along and doing their bit to make a fire door into a fire door out of lots of pieces. I always ask the question, will you ever certify the removal of a door set or door parts so that they can then be reusable as a fire door, as another component in another fire door set? They always sort of say, oh, that's an interesting idea, and nothing happens. But somehow we need to kind of try and persuade people that, the thousands of fire doors that come out of buildings that are being dismantled, they should be saved because they are, a fairly rare commodity if they're in good nick. And to just smash them up and destroy them,
you're right.
Such a waste.
You're right, and they're high value too.
Yeah.
The tops normally either on the top of the jamb of the door, of the actual door itself, you could not the jamb, the actual door, around the edge of the door, the top edge of the door, or on the hinge side, or sometimes underneath the door, so you can't actually see it anyway. They actually have the fire rating of the door. And then the door closer, because they always have door closers as well, they've got fire ratings on as well. So if you adopted that system and cut round the architrave with a skill saw so that you kept everything together in one place, you would have a door set. But I spoke to, there's a guy called Andrew Ellsworth in the USA, who has a business called Doors Unhinged, which he started about 3 years ago, by memory.
Yeah,
maybe a bit more. And he saves modern doors from demolition.
Yeah,
and strips them all down, takes all the ironmongery off, and the hinges and everything, and you just end up with a load of doors, a load of ironmongery, door closers, and the rest of it. And he then sells that stuff back to architect but then he has to put them all back together again. And so the cost of doing that is not cheap.
No.
And I said to him, why don't you do that? Why don't you leave them in place and cut round the architrave? And he said it's too difficult to do.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know. I would argue that it's a lot simpler doing that than taking everything apart and then putting it all back together again.
Yeah, I suppose that you're always under pressure and time pressure on site, aren't you? That's the problem, I guess. To be able to, because I've seen people with, everyone seems to have one. Your standard drill set with a different front end on it, which has a piece of metal that waggles left, right, and it will actually chop through wood easily. But it's a slow process. And if you're under pressure to get things out, you're just going to go in with a jemmy and smash it all up and pull it out easily. So it's that whole issue that you've raised with me in the past, and it's sort of been brought up so often, that the later you leave things, the less time you have to dismantle buildings, so you end up demolishing them. And now, something that happened, I noticed this recently, that there was a demolition of a hospital building in Peterborough, not far from me, where the planning application for a new development, by default, the demolition was part of the permitted development for that site, and they didn't even have to apply. I think there was a bit of paperwork, but it was a foregone conclusion that would be given. So it could be given early enough for people to go in and demolish, to deconstruct without that kind of time pressure. So that if that's standard for all development, then there is a kind of a window of opportunity there to be able to get in and start dismantling, instead of the kind of put under pressure to rip things out and destroy them in the process. But there was another aspect of the thing I mentioned earlier about fire doors and fire door sets, is that this BWF certifier scheme, which was intended to allow contractors to do what they always want to do, and that is not pay for a door set, which is an expensive process allegedly, but they would employ a timber, a joiner to make a door frame. They'd employ somebody to bring a door, somebody else to cut a hole in it, somebody else to fit glass to it, and then somebody else to fit ironmongery. So it's kind of the way they do things, because it allegedly is cheaper. So that approach has been effectively squashed out of the market, because now, post-Grenfell, nobody trusts it anymore, and the only way they will do fire doors is a fire door set. Yeah. So I mean, that puts a bit of pressure on the idea of actually reclaiming things as a set, and reselling it as a set. So that kind of makes sense. If that's the current situation in the UK, it's obviously maybe different in America, but it would make sense for people to kind of try and get into that market and make a business out of it.
Yeah, there's a couple of other things about doors. I mean, one of the things we find here is that we're rung up every week by somebody who's been they're putting a loft conversion in or doing something to a house, and as part of the rules for that, they have to, and it might be a Georgian or Victorian house with really nice thick panelled doors. Yeah. They have to remove all those doors, throw them away, and put fire doors in, even in an ordinary single dwelling domestic house. And so an awful lot of doors are getting thrown away as a result of doing that, which just seems crazy to me. And I suspect that there could be a much simpler way of dealing with this. So it's the panels that are going to be the weak parts in the fire, not the frame, which is usually thick. Yeah. At least you're bound to get at least half an hour from the frame, maybe an hour. But the panels maybe are the weak point, and if nothing else, you could rip around all the mouldings on all the panels and put some kind of wood or fireproof material on top.
Yeah, well, I mean, historically, there've always been these little technical guides by all of the various timber subsectors on how to upgrade a fire door, upgrade an existing door to make it a fire door. And it was just infill panels in each of the recesses of the surface, and then a board across the top. So you didn't throw the door away, but it was no longer a figurative door. It was just a blank now, so you kind of lost the character.
Is that on your website?
It isn't, but it ought to be, because it's just another one of those things that we should be finding that information and making it readily available.
No, I just wondered whether you had it, because you've been going for as long as I have.
Yeah, that's right.
And so you would if you'd collected that information then.
Yeah.
Or are you able to get old regulations?
Well, I would imagine that publication probably still exists and it's still valid. So it would be appropriate to try and grab hold of it. But if post-Grenfell, the whole issue about upgrading a non-fire door to a fire door is no longer permissible, that's a problem. But we need to kind of find out what the current situation is.
What would have happened, though, is that some committee somewhere of manufacturers sat down and said, right, this is the new fire door, this is what everybody's got to use, and discounted the possibility of being able to make an old door fit those rules.
Yeah.
It's not in their interest, because they make doors.
Of course.
I've changed all the wooden windows to plastic windows. It's a commercial expedient rather than something that's sensible or anything that's going to save the planet.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up on one of the points that you made earlier when you were reading the SDGs, is that the whole business of recycling contradicts one of the other Sustainable Development Goals, in that it talks about healthy lifestyles and living in healthy buildings.
Well, you try telling that to the British Plastics Federation, or whatever it's called, and they would argue black is white, that plastic is extremely green and eco-friendly materials.
Of course they do. But you've only got to go and see a building after a fire to see the rubber rings hanging out of the PVC windows. And you know, the interesting thing is the ASBP, Association of Sustainable Building Products, I know association is the wrong word, I think it's affiliate, have had their annual conferences on health, and they've had firemen come and talk to you about the problems of plastics in buildings in fires, and you know that the firemen actually die in the gym afterwards, not at the fire through all of the chemicals that have got into their lungs, but they're in their lungs, but they're relatively safe as they go into the gym and they draw all of the nasty toxins deep into their blood system by lots of energetic breathing, and causes all kinds of problems and sometimes kills people after the event. We need to move away from plastics, but also we need to move away from recycled content, whatever, you know, because it overcomplicates things, and especially in fire situations. But
right, so I'm moving on now.
Okay.
Futurebuild London, 7th of March. Well, you're going to be there 5th, 6th and 7th of March. I'm going to be there on the 7th of March. We're going to meet up, and if anybody listens to this live audio event now, Reclamation Time, as a podcast, and wants to meet up with us, just send us a tweet or a tagged with Reclamation Time, or send it direct to either me or Brian, and it would be interesting to have a chat with you there. And Brian and I are going to have a chat, and hopefully we're going to do a little bit of live feed from, well, not live feed, we're going to record a bit of audio from Futurebuild.
Just a quick reminder, for you to remind me, when we go to Futurebuild, that ACAN, I think, have just published something on circular economy, reclaim and reuse. And they're bound to have it on their stand to purchase a copy.
Yes.
So it's important that we pick one up.
Now, Duncan Baker Brown has got his reuse atlas. It has now been produced again. And I don't know what's in it. I haven't seen it. I'm reluctant to buy it because I've got too many books here. I've got a one in, one out policy here now. I just got too many books. Yeah. And so, that's on the RIBA stand. The next Reclamation Time is going to be Tuesday, the 12th of March, live, and we may have some audio recording from a trip round Futurebuild.
Yeah.
Tuesday, the 12th of March.